Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video book review on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and our book today is by Michael Heidler, and it is on the U.S. M3/M3A1 Submachine Gun, A Complete History of the U.S. Grease Gun. There actually hasn't been a book out there specifically dedicated to the M3 submachine gun, aka the grease gun, because it looks vaguely like a grease gun. There hasn't been a book out there on this subject, which is a little bit unusual. There are references in a couple of books. Bruce Canfield has a book on all U.S. small arms from World War II, and that has a section on this. There's a very old book on submachine guns of the world that has a small section on the M3, but there hasn't been a proper full-length book written on it. And Michael Heidler saw that and thought, well, heck, I can write one of those. He has written a number of books previously. Probably the original one that most people may be familiar with is his book on German World War II factory codes, which is a really great reference. Not exactly super engaging reading, but a fantastic reference work on deciphering all the code marks. He also recently wrote a book on the Suomi submachine gun, which was published in both German and English, and now his book on the grease gun, which is, by the way, entirely in English. So it comes out at 224 pages and really covers the whole length and breadth of the M3 grease gun. There isn't necessarily a whole lot to talk about with the grease gun because it was only in service for a relatively short period of time. It was developed, of course, during World War II to replace the Thompson. The Thompson was seen as being a gun that was too expensive to manufacture, took too long, and they wanted to simplify. One thing that I particularly like about this book is that he has a pretty decent amount of information on a lot of the competitors in the original trials that would eventually lead to the M3 being adopted. So we've got guns like the Star submachine gun, the Atmed, the Olsen, the Woodhull, a whole bunch of interesting guns that were tested by Aberdeen and rejected. Then has details on the actual development process when the Ordnance Department decided to get involved itself in the design, worked with George Hyde, worked with GM's Guide Lamp division, which is a cool story in and of itself. This is a company that originated making basically headlamps for motor vehicles. They were acquired by GM, General Motors, in 1928 as as part of GM's attempt to sort of build an entire car by itself. And by World War II, they became a major chunk of U.S. military industry. They made, I think, 1.6 million M2 Browning machine gun barrels, as well as basically all of the grease guns. So the gun was adopted mid-World War II. Production ended in 1945 when they had enough of them. There was one major development iteration, and that was the M3A1. And Heidler does a really good job of describing what changed and why, and describing properly portraying how some of these changes actually took place before the M3A1 was adopted. They were updates, like updates to the rear sight, that were made during M3 production, which were then incorporated into the M3A1 overall new firearm standard. There's also a lot of cool information about the actual factory process, a whole bunch of photos of the manufacturing facilities, and some cool little details in there that you might not otherwise know, like the Guide Lamp division offered bounties to its own workers. If you could come up with a better way to do a process that would save time or save materials, and they adopted it, they would give you a nice bonus for saving time and making the process more efficient. And there are a number of examples of those shared in the book. Production ended, as I said, in 1945. The gun was still in service during the Korean War, and there was actually a short run of additional grease guns made by the Ithaca Gun Company actually just after the Korean War. So there are some details on those. And then there are sections covering training, maintenance, disassembly, accessories for the grease gun. There aren't a lot, but there are some, and what there are, Heidler covers. These are things like the cleaning supplies, magazine pouches, which is an interesting bit. It took them actually a little while to adopt a magazine pouch. A grease gun magazine will not properly fit in a Thompson gun pouch. And so for a while, there was actually official military instruction to tape a couple of your magazines together, the whole jungle magazine thing, because that was the best way to carry spare magazines for the grease gun. And so there are actually a bunch of period pictures shown in here of guys doing that. Also, interestingly, since I'm on the subject, there's also discussion of field-modified grease guns. The original M3 had the side crank handle that turned out to be rather fragile, and there were a number of field expedient modifications to fix grease guns that the charging handle broke on before the M3A1 got rid of the handle entirely. So that's covered in here as well. Really, it's a pretty darn good overview of everything you would want to know about the grease gun. If I have one complaint about it, it is that there's not a huge depth of content in any one given area. But on the other hand, I suspect that's because there isn't a whole lot of information out there. The gun was only in service for about 10 or 15 years, really. It was formally replaced by the M14 rifle. Yes, a lot of the guns did survive, did continue to be used in various forms all the way up until the 1990s, but wasn't a whole lot done with them. Oh, I should point out at the end there is also a section on foreign use and versions of the grease gun, focusing particularly on Argentina, who made a couple of their own copies of it, as well as China. There were warlord era, or actually post-World War II Chinese Civil War era versions of the grease gun made in China, and those are discussed a bit in here, as well as little things like the 9mm conversions for British use or OSS use that saw some coverage, the suppressed versions. Like I said, pretty much everything is covered in here. It'd be neat to see some of it go a little nerdier, a little more in-depth, but I don't know how much of that information really exists just because there wasn't a whole lot done with the grease gun. So if it's a gun that you are interested in, as was pointed out to me in an email, it's like every year there's 5 new books on the Thompson, and yet still nobody had done one on the grease gun. So there it is. Now there is a book on the grease gun. You can get this through Schiffer, directly, the publisher, or you can get it on Amazon. I'll have links to both in the description text below. As of this filming, the cover price is appropriately enough, $45. In fact, they made it $45 even instead of $44.99, which I suspect is not a mistake. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you like the grease gun, check out the book. Thanks for watching.